Football defenses are often based on the head coach or the defensive coordinator's philosophies, but what defense is actually the best? In this video, we're going to cover all the most common defensive structures, the pros and cons of each defense, and the personnel needed to play them. Consider this a masterclass for understanding football defenses. Now, before we actually get into defensive structures, we got to teach you about defensive techniques, because that way everything will make sense and the picture will be complete. So what defensive techniques are essentially where the coach tells the defensive player to line up. He's not just going to say, hey, line up on the guard or line up on the tackle. They have numbers and a system that they use in order for the players to line up. And just real quick to teach you the system in 30 seconds or less, everything is broken up into odd and even numbers. So to start, when you line up head up a center, guard, or tackle, that's going to be an even number. So starting with the center, it's going to be a 0. Starting with the guard, it's going to be a 2, and then the tackle is going to be a 4, and then the tight end will be a 6. Now, if we want to be inside shaded on these guard, tackle, and tight end, it's going to be the head up number plus an I. So head up the guard to the inside shoulders is a 2I, head up the tackle, inside shoulder is a 4I, and then head up the tight end, inside shoulder is a 6I. And now with outside techniques, we're going to go to the odd numbering system. So outside the center is going to be a 1. Outside the guard is going to be a 3. Outside the tackle is going to be a 5. And then outside the tight end is going to be called a 7, also known as a wide 9. Now, of course, every coach has their philosophy. We found this is the easiest way to teach the system. A few other words you may hear is a 1 technique may also be called a shade on the center, and a 2I may also be called a G technique. Okay, so now that you know the system, let's get into our first defense. Now, the first defense that we're going to talk about is the 3-4 structure. Now, what is the 3-4 defense? It has 3 defensive linemen that are going to have their hand on the ground, and then 4 linebackers are going to play behind it, along with 4 defensive backs that are playing behind that. Now, why play the 3-4 defense? In my opinion, it's the most flexible defense you can play because I'd label this player a linebacker because you can walk him up to the line of scrimmage and now you're in a 4-down set, or you can walk him back and he can play coverage deep behind. So this defense really allows you to be flexible if you want to be 4 down or 3 down and not be constrained to what this player's ability is. So this player, if you have a bigger linebacker that will play here, think about back in the New York Giants days where Bill Belichick used Lawrence Taylor as this player where he could do essentially anything. He could walk up, he could play in coverage. He was so athletic that he can do pretty much anything. Now, there are 3 main fronts that the 3-4 structure uses. The first one being the tight front. T-I-T-E is how it's spelled, okay? And don't ask why, but that's just how it's spelled in football. So you're going to have a 0 technique from the nose. You're going to have a 4I from the tackle. You're going to have another 4I from the other tackle. So you see how important it is where coaches can just label it as tight. They can get into their 4I structure. Linebackers are going to be in 20s, okay? For the linebacker techniques, we just add a 0 onto the defensive line techniques. So he's going to be head up the guard, which is going to be a 2, add a 0, it's a 20. Same thing here, add a 2, 0, 20. And then these players here are going to be playing either cover 2 or cover 4 based on their coach's system, but they'll play somewhere in this apex area between the tackle and the slot receiver. But this is essentially what a tight front is, and a lot of spread teams, whether it be college, NFL, are going to this type of system because it allows them to cancel out the A gaps and have this dominant nose player to be able to 2 gap or play 1 gap and then have these linebackers play the other A gap. The next front is what a lot of teams will call a stack front, meaning you're just going to keep your nose in a 0 technique. You're going to move your tackle to head up the tackle now in a 4 technique. And then same thing over here. He's going to be in a 4 technique. Nothing changes with the linebackers or the defensive backs, but we're just slightly adjusting ourselves to a 4 as opposed to a 4I. Now you may ask, what's the difference? Why do you move him over just a half inch to a 4 as opposed to a 4I? And the long explanation would be, if you are in a 4I and a team runs a gap scheme, and we'll link a video above when we're talking about power or counter or any of those gap schemes, if he's inside the tackle, he's going to get blocked down on. Now, based on the offensive rules, if he's head up the tackle, and they want to run these gap schemes, Well, now he's going to bypass him to go block a linebacker because now this guard is going to kick him out. So every defensive coordinator will have a structure about how they handle gap schemes and how they play just normal zone schemes. And this 4 and 4i has a huge impact on how they play each structure. And then the last front structure, which you'll commonly see, is what's called an Oki front. So you're going to have this tackle move into a 5 technique. He's on the outside shoulder of this tackle, and he's going to move to a 5 technique as well on the outside shoulder of this tackle. Nothing changes for linebackers on the edges or on the interior as well. So again, 5 technique, 4 technique, 4i is normally what you'll see these tackles bounce in between when they're trying to get set in an odd front. Now, why do we want to play a 3-4 defense? A lot of teams that have a dominant nose tackle who can punch the center and then play either gap will play a 3-4 front structure. Think about the Patriots' old days when they had Vince Wilfork or any of these bigger body dominant nose guards where teams can rely on their linebackers to play fast and just have that bigger body control the center and control the A gap. That way, if they do run any up the middle, that this player can disengage and then make a tackle. Now, some pros of playing a 3-4 defense, like we mentioned, are you're able to take your linebacker and move him up to go 4 front or back him off to play a 3 front. So as far as being a hybrid player and what you can do with the defenses really allow you to be flexible and not just stuck into one structure. So that's one thing, is just the flexibility to get in the 3 down and 4 down. Next, you'll see at typically the high school and college level where a lot of runs are on the perimeter, the edges. This allows you to get more players to the edges and a lot more speed on the field as opposed to having bigger bodies on the field running a 4 or 5 man front. And as we talked about the flexibility, there is a lot more flexibility to bring pressures, spin coverages, rotate coverages. You can pretty much do anything out of a 3 front defense because it allows you to have more linebackers and defensive back on the back end, as opposed to having a true defensive end where now you have less players on the back end and you can't be as flexible coverage wise. So a 3 down front really allows you to be flexible on the back end and do pretty much whatever you want to do from a blitz structure wise, twist wise, stunt game, anything you can pretty much do out of odd front. Now, what are some cons of the 3-4 defense? And in our opinion, if you don't have a dominant nose to play that 0 technique and he's getting blown off the football every single time, then you're losing your A-gap fit. So you need to have that dominant nose. If you watch any NFL games and they try to run a 3-4 and they don't have that nose that can protect both A-gaps, you're often going to get gashed up the middle. And that's where a lot of times you see these teams are in the bottom half of defense, especially stopping the run. It's typically because their interior tackles aren't very good or aren't able to control their gaps that they're supposed to. The second con would be if you don't have linebackers that are aggressive. You may see this at the high school or college level where the linebackers are just pounding their feet and they're not really moving, and the linemen are able to climb on top and block the linebackers. This often hurts you in a 3-4 structure because smaller linebackers who are faster, maybe in this 3-4 structure, are just going to get blocked and swallowed up by those offensive linemen. So you need to have those players that are aggressive, and you need to have that nose that is anchoring those A gaps to help keep the linebackers clean. That way they can scrape to the football and make tackles. Next, we're going to talk about the 4-3 defense. And what is the 4-3 defense? Again, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 down linemen, 1, 2, 3 linebackers. These linebackers are commonly called Sam, the Mike, and the Will, for strong, middle, and weak, or you can mix them up depending how the coach's philosophy is. And again, you have your defense, you have 2 defensive ends, you have a nose, and then you have a tackle. Now, the most common defensive front structure in the 4-3 defense is what we call an over front, meaning the 3 technique is going to be to the strong side. So when we talk about an over front, we're looking at a 5 technique from the defensive end, which is going to be outside shoulder of the tackle. A 3 technique is going to be outside shoulder of the guard. A 1 technique is going to be on the outside shoulder of the center. And then on the backside, again, a 5 technique on the outside shoulder of the tackle. This is what's called an over front. And a lot of teams that have tight ends in the mix will keep this player in a 5, this player in a 3. And then you may be asking, like, how do you know where to put the 3 technique, or how do you know where to put the 1 technique? Like, what determines that? Oftentimes, the line of scrimmage will determine that. So if there's a tight end on the line of scrimmage, the teams will want to put their tight end to the mix here. They'll keep him in a 5 sometimes, or they'll move him into a 6 and play the front structure like this. So if you ever see a defensive end that may be standing up playing a tight end, or in a 3-point stance playing a tight end, this will be what we call a 6 technique. If not, they'll be just in a 5 technique. But for this, we'll put him in a 6 technique. But again, the over structure is 3 technique to the tight end, 1 technique, and then 5 on the backside. If you wanted to play an under structure, so you have over, and now we're going to talk about under, you would move the nose to a 1, and then the 3 technique would go away from the tight end. So now again, you'd keep your defensive end in a 5 technique. You would adjust your linebacker slightly, and now you're playing an under technique, meaning the 3 technique is going away from the tight end. Now, what are the benefits of playing a 4-3 defense? And my opinion, the first thing is the gap structure and the gap fits are a lot easier. We talked about the 3-4 structure where that nose is playing A gap to A gap. So the other linebackers don't know which A gap they have because the nose is going to play both of them. Well, here it cleans up the gap fits. So if I'm in a 3 technique, I own what's called the B gap. If I'm a nose and I'm in a 1 technique, I own the A gap. Defensive end here is going to own the C gap. Defensive end here is going to own the other C gap. So there's really only 2 gaps open. You got this one, and then you got this one here. Well, linebacker's going to take that one, and then depending on the flow of the football, the will take that one as well. So if you notice, we create a wall here where he just has to fill that gap and he has to fill that gap, and there's nowhere for the running back to run. So if you're ever watching an NFL game and you notice that the running back gets the football and there's just a brick wall and there's nowhere for him to run, this is why, because every player filled their gap. And you can see there's nowhere for the running back to run. So this is why it's so important in a 4-3 defense that everyone comes up and fills their gaps. But this is one of the pros of playing the 4-3 defense is everyone is able to say, I have a gap, let's go fill that gap and let's go hit that thing as fast as possible to create that wall. And then coverage-wise, we'll link a video above if you want to go more in depth on cover 2 and cover 4. But those are the 2 main coverages out of a 4-3 defense. And essentially what it is we're going to have the safety, it's going to cover a deep half, and then this safety is covering a deep half. And then the corner, Will, Mike, Sam, and the other corner are all going to take these underneath zones. They're going to cover areas of field underneath. Again, we'll link a video above to go more into depth on what cover 2 and cover 4 really is. But that's the basis of what structure coverage-wise that you're going to be playing in this. And then, of course, there's a version of Tampa cover 2 where, as we talked about, the strong safety is going to take this side, free safety is going to take that side, and then your Mike is running the middle of the field. So it essentially creates 1, 2, 3 players that are going to be deep. And that's what the Tampa variation of playing cover 2 is. Now, along with the easy gap fits for the run, it's also easy to stunt out of, okay? So you'll see a lot of times the 4-3 structure will have linemen that are going to be twisting and stunting. And what do we mean by that? So a most common stunt out of a 4-3 defense is you're going to bring this guy up and through. So he now owns the B gap into the C gap. And then this defensive end is going to up and loop all the way through. You see it all the time on 3rd down where these defensive ends are going to get here and then penetrate, and then he's up and through. You see these guys looping all the time. And with a 4-down structure, you bring these 4 players closer to the line of scrimmage so they're able to hit these stunts a lot faster as opposed to having to wait for a linebacker to blitz from depth. They can hit these things now and they can confuse the offensive lineman. And that's where a lot of times you see like Crosby or these guys that are looping through and have free shots at the quarterback is because the coach did a great job of calling it, but also the defensive lineman did a great job of executing. And that's one of the pros of playing the 4-3 defense is if you have really good players up front, you're able to execute those stunts. Now let's talk about some cons of playing the 4-3 defense. And there is a few, and it's good to be aware of, and coaches are obviously aware of this too, but it's good for you as a viewer and a fan to learn why the 4-3 defense is great, but also can be taken advantage of. So the first thing is just the lack of creativity from a coverage standpoint. We talked about playing cover 2, cover 4, but because you have 4 down linemen, you can only use these 3 linebackers to play coverage. So you could roll to a cover 1 if you want to, where you bring him down. Maybe he's going to blitz the A gap. This Sam bumps in the box and he's got the running back. He's going to rotate to play. He'll come in, he'll play the running back, he'll play the slot receiver, and now you have a cover 1. Or you can rotate him down. Again, you can keep this blitz on the middle here, and now you're playing some sort of zone coverage like cover 3, where these guys are now playing their zones on the back end. So realistically, it's you can get creative in how you do certain things, but it's not as creative as a 3-4 and how you can move those players around and try to get the offensive lineman to make mistakes. So the creativity aspect does lack a little bit, but it's not, you're not so constricted, but you're not as restricted as the 3-4 defense. Next, and this actually falls on the coach, if the coach doesn't change up his over under structure, it can get taken advantage of. What do we mean by that? So if we have a tight end in and we said that, hey, we're always going to run an over front, meaning we're always going to put our 3 technique to the field and always going to put him in a 6 technique. So we're saying that's our base rules whenever we get a tight end. Well, let's say a team has a really good tight end, like a Travis Kelce or like a Rob Gronkowski or any of those blocking tight ends that love to be physical. Well, what if we put him on the ball? We know we're always going to get this look from the defense. So then offensive coordinators start to get creative about how they can beat this structure. And there are certain plays that do beat this structure. So it's up for the defensive coordinator to get creative with the front, whether it be to slant the front, move the front, or do different things. That way they're not always in a 3 technique, not always in a 1 technique, and then not always in a 6 or a 5. They need to get creative in how they do certain things. That's why you'll often see these players will zone drop out, or they'll bring a guy in this gap, drop this guy back. Depending, right? They have to do different things, especially in the NFL. You have to get creative because good offensive coordinators will take advantage of your every down front structure if you don't change it up. Okay, so that's one thing that I listed as a con is just you have to get creative in how you bring your appearance and how you show the offensive line that you're going to attack them. Next, we're going to talk about the 4-2-5 defense. And this defense is mainly seen at the high school and college level, but we wanted to include it because it is starting to make its way into the NFL and how teams play different spread offenses. So 4-2-5, what does that mean? You're going to have 4 defensive linemen, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 linebackers are going to be your Sam and Mike, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 defensive backs. So if you notice in the last 2 structures, we had what was called a will. Well, a lot of teams will play an NI, which is a nickel, or they'll play a star or a jack. There's many different names for how teams use this player, but oftentimes you'll see him be called a nickel. Now, if we went back to the 80s and the 70s, you'd see a nickelback come in the game and he would only come down in 3rd down. Well, with how much passing there is nowadays, this nickel is pretty much on the field the entire time. So you don't just have him in for passing down situations, but because of teams are throwing the ball 30, 40 times a game, you need to have more speed on the field. Now, the 4-2-5 defense, front structure-wise, is similar to the 4-3 defense. So you're going to see a lot of over and under fronts being played. But also, too, when we look at the back end structure, we have 5 defensive backs. And the 4-2-5 was really born because of the field and boundary. What do we mean by field and boundary? We call this the field, this area on the right side of the field that has more field to it. So if you notice the ball's on the hash right here, and I'll move this whole set over, ball's on the hash. So there's about roughly 2/3 of the field that need to be covered. But we're into the boundary meaning the closed side of the field or the tight side of the field. And if it's the tight side of the field, that means they don't have enough room to operate. So you don't need to put more players over there. So if we were a 4-3 structure, for instance, right, it would look like this, where we have these 3 players here. Well, I don't necessarily need this player to be into the boundary because there's no field to work with. So what can I do? I can bump him back into the box and I can put my nickel out here where there's more field to cover, and that way I have more resources over there to cover it. On the backside here, you're going to be able to cancel out the run, which we'll talk about in a minute coverage-wise, but structure-wise, this is what a lot of teams were going to, especially at the high school and college level, where the hashes are further apart because they have to cover more field, right? So this is the 4-2-5 structure, and this nickel back needs to be an extremely athletic player to be able to cover the pass but also play the run. Now, coverage-wise, you'll often see a split field coverage come out of the 4-2-5 defense. What do we mean by split field coverage? You're literally going to draw a line directly in between these two. So if you see 1, 2, 3 defensive players are going to play over the top of these 2 receivers, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 are going to play over the top of these 3 receivers on the offense side of the football. So you can get creative. This is what's great about the 4-2-5 is you can get creative on what coverages you play based on what the offense is giving you. Now, the most common structure to play is what we call cover 6 or quarter half, meaning this corner is going to take this deep half. So he'll drop back here. This safety will play this quarter back here. And then on the backside, they're playing half field. It's like we talked about cover 2. That's what we mean by half. He'll play the deep half. And then the corner is responsible for playing this flat right here. Again, you'll often see it be called cover 6, quarter, and then half on the backside. And then this player, of course, is going to play the flats to this side, and then he's going to drop on the flats to this side. And then if we're going to complete the picture here, Sam's on the backside. So it looks like this. So you notice we have more bubbles on the right side because we have more players. and it allows us to be more flexible to the field. Now, why play the 4-2-5 defense? And in my opinion, it allows you to get your safeties into the run fit. So oftentimes you'll see these safeties be a little bit closer and allows them to fit the box. So really, you're fitting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players, and then these players can be late to the fit. So the structure of the defense allows those safeties to get a little bit closer and they can get downhill and fit the run. Now, what are some cons of playing the 4-2-5 defense? And let's say the ball is played roughly in the middle of the field. So we'll say 5 yards either way in the middle of the field. Well, now we get a wide split here, and we said we're going to go quarter, half. Well, then how does this Sam linebacker come out and play his part of the zone defense and be able to play his gap here in the middle? Because we said what the 4-down structure allows you to do is allows you to play your gap fits. Well, we're going to say this Sam has this A gap, this Mike has this B gap. Well, then how do we play that and then play the pass? You can't do both. So where the 4-2-5 can get a little bit at least complicated for coaches is if he has to bump out, well, now we have to change the front up. That way we can cancel out gaps, and then he can take the defensive end's gap right there. So the defensive coordinator needs to be really on top of how are we canceling out gaps. So if he has to bump out, do we want to do this so we can go B to C and then he can cancel out the A gaps? There's a bunch of ways to do it, but coaches need to be super cognizant of where the ball is every single play, and then how are those linebackers going to get out and play pass and also be able to cancel out gaps. So you see in the 2 minutes I just explained to you, you can get a little bit of a headache if you're not perfect on everything that you do and you don't have those built-in rules to explain to your players. That way they don't have to think, they can just react to what's going on. And that's where things can get a little bit crazy with the 4-2-5. Next, we're going to talk about the 3-3 stack. And the 3-3 stack is very common at the youth and high school level. It also is making its way into the college level where teams will use it as a shakeup. And we'll show you why it is a good shakeup and also how it can get taken advantage of. So why is it called the 3-3 stack? It's because it's exactly like it sounds. We're going to have 3 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers, and they're going to be stacked on top of each other. So you're going to get your Sam that's going to stack on top of the tackle. That's in a 4 technique. A Mike that's stacked on top of the nose, who's in a 0, and then a Will that is stacked on top of this tackle, which is also in a 4 technique. So you get 4-0-4, and then you're getting 40-0-40 if we're talking linebacker techniques. Now, what are the pros of playing a 3-3 stack? And the first one being it's chaotic for the offensive line because there's always players moving. You're always going to get some sort of this. He's going to be slanting. He's going to be hitting this A gap, and then we can do pressure movements like that. We can move the 1 tackle in, 1 tackle out, and then he's hitting here, and then he's getting to this A gap. There's so many things that you can do out of 3-3 stack to cause chaos. You can have this guy here, you can loop him around and then bring him through the A gap. There's so many pressures and different things that coordinators can do to try to confuse the offensive line. And this is one of the benefits of playing the 3-3 stack is that if a defensive coordinator knows what gap needs to be fit and he's running all these players around and we got slanting and all this stuff, it's chaos for the offensive line. It's chaos for the offensive coordinator. It's chaos for the block protection because if they're running pass sets, when this guy decides to bite in on this tackle that's slanting through his B gap and we get a free looper around, that's usually we get a free hitter from. So 3-3 stack really is a great way to shake up the offense of line and both offensive coordinator. Now, why may teams shy away from the 3-3 stack? And it's because of the chaos we just talked about, where if you're a defensive coordinator and let's say this guy stunts and this guy's supposed to loop to the A gap and you end up getting ripped right here. Well, then how do you break it down? Because you know that a player is supposed to get to the A gap, but did it hit A gap? Did it hit B gap? Well, we had a player slanting there and this player was supposed to loop, and you see how crazy it can get where if you don't know exactly how to break it down, it can cause a little bit of confusion for the coach. And we'll give you an example. If we were back to our over front, like we talked about in the over structure, we know who has the A gap. We know who has the B gap. We know who has both C gaps. That's easy. Well, we bring these players back and we get to this point. Now it can get a little bit chaotic about who's doing what or who's going where, and it's a lot harder to dissect. So while you do get a benefit of players moving and players going at a fast pace, the breakdown structure, if you don't know it and aren't clean with it as a coach, it can hurt the brain a little bit and then cause you to give up big plays on the back end. Lastly, we want to talk about the 5-2 and the 6-2 defense. These are front structures that teams may play that is just a hybridized version of the 3-4, and then they also will get into goal line sets to stop short yardage play. So we want to walk you through those real quick. We'll show you the pros and cons and why teams will play that style of defense. So let's talk about the 5-2 defense and the different front structures and how teams will play it. So first things first, we'll have a zero technique, which is right on the center. And then instead of having 4 eyes like we did in the tight front, we're going to bump these guys to 3s. This is also known as a bear front, where you have a 0 and 2 3s. And then you'll have this defensive end that will be walked into a 5 technique, similar like we did with the over-under structure. So you have a 0, 2 3s, and 2 5s. Again, you can play this player in a 6 technique if you do get a tight end. But this is what a 5-2 structure looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then your 2 linebackers will be right here. On the back end, teams will play either a cover 2 defense, a cover 1, where they can walk this player down, this player over, and then this player has the tight end. There's different ways that you can play that as well, but the bare structure of a 0 and 2 3s and 2 5s is mainly the front structure for a 5-2 defense. Again, the pros of it, very good at run stopping because you have more players at the line of scrimmage. The weaknesses obviously are going to be you don't have a lot of players on the back end, so more mistakes can happen. That's why you don't see a lot of teams that play this as an every down type defense, because it just can hurt you because you have less players on the edges and perimeters. One thing that you may get tossed up a little bit when watching an NFL game is a 3-4 structure with just a walk down tight end. So if we want to get into tight 4-eye, 0, 4-eye, you may see these players play here and then this player walk down on the edge. You may think, oh, they're running a 4-2-5. Well, technically, yes, but all they did was just take their 3-4 defense and just walk down this player. And they could just walk down this player. So they may be 3-4 based, but they can walk up their linebackers, and now it looks like they're in a 5-2. So it's always good to look at who are these players right here. Are they true defensive ends with their hand in the dirt, or are they linebackers that just walk up on the line of scrimmage to create this 5-2 structure? So that's the big thing to look for. And whenever I teach coaches or just teach people of the game, like, the structure matters, but the players matter as well, because it allows the defensive coordinators to be more flexible. And then same thing, if they want to go double tight and we want to walk this player up, we want to walk this player into a 6. So we have here playing double 6s. And then maybe we want to take this strong safety out of the game and we'll bring in another linebacker, and he's up on the edge right now here, just like that. They bring this guy, whoever it may be, and there's your 6-2 structure. So you may see teams do this as well, where they want to go back to even, to bring him in like that. And then there's your 6-2 box right there. So it's always good to look at, again, who the players are and then what the structure is on the back end. So those are our defensive structures. I hope you got a ton out of this video. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. I'm happy to help out. If you want to learn even more, we created the ultimate football guide to help you learn even more football. It has more answers about the game, front structures, coverages, everything's in this guide that will help you out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.